cocktail sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
Thank you, Frank. Well, I want to talk to you about a little bit about innovation and entrepreneurship and what is it that we can do individually to make a massive impact in the world. So let's start with problems here. So here we sit here with 7 billion population in the world. And we all know that it's only a matter of time, whether it's 20 years or 30 years, when we get to 10 billion population. And we all know, we all wonder, how would this planet support 10 billion people? And the obvious answer is, well, we need to do something about conservation, right? Or, in other words, sustainability. Sustainability has become a word, another word for conservation. Less use, less of what we have, and that's how we're going to make this planet sustainable. My hypothesis is you cannot ever be a sustainable planet with conservation. You have to think about creation. You have to create more of what you need, not use less of what you have. Because if you don't, at the end of the day, it's only a matter of time, then you can't use less and less, and you can't survive. So how do you create abundance of everything that you need in life? And I'm going to give you some of the thought process about everything that we think about, whether it is education, whether it is healthcare, whether it's energy, or you talk about the clean water, or any of the massive problems. How do we solve them using innovation and entrepreneurship? So let's talk about what they really mean to innovate. And I think there's a confusion. Most people think of innovation as invention. Innovation is not necessarily an invention. You can be innovative by simply thinking about the problem differently. And if you think about the problem differently, the solution that you come out of the thing are very, very different. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how you look at the problem differently and suddenly the solutions are so different, and that makes you innovative, not necessarily invention. And I think this is one of the other things that I think is, for an entrepreneur, what does it really mean to be an entrepreneur? If I ask you, who is an entrepreneur? And people say the entrepreneur is somebody who goes out and starts a company. To me, that is a wrong definition of an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is simply a state of mind. What is that state of mind that makes an entrepreneur an entrepreneur? I look at the world, there are 3 types of people in this world. People who see problems. And I can tell you that each one of us are really, really good at seeing the problem. And since all of us are good at it, let's call the people who see problem human beings. We are very good at that, right? Some of us are, in fact, even good at finding the solution to these problems, and these are the people we call visionaries. So people who are here working on a downtown projects, these are visionaries. They have a vision of how to take something here and completely transform into a different thing. That's visionary. And there are very few people in the world who go out and actually do something about it. And those people who are the problem solver and people who believe in execution are the true entrepreneurs. And that happens to be, you can be a visionary and an entrepreneur. And I believe the people who are working on a downtown project are not only a visionary, they are great entrepreneurs. So thank yourself for that. Now, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what does it really take to become a successful entrepreneur, and then I'm going to give you a little bit about how do we go about looking at the problem differently. So anytime you come up with a problem, your first inclination is simple. Let's go ask an expert. The problem with asking an expert is experts are very good at 2 things. First of all, telling you that it won't work. They have tried it, it just doesn't work. And if you find somebody who's really a smart expert, they might even come up with something incrementally a better solution. Almost all of the disruptive ideas come from non-experts. So if you are an expert in your field, which many of you are more or less useless when it comes to your own field, right? So when people tell you that you should think outside the box, they're giving you the wrong advice. What you really need to do is think in a different box. If you're an expert in this field, go out and apply that expertise to a completely different area. and you will find that you become and you come up with some very disruptive ideas because you are smart in your field and you need to apply the similar type of thinking in the area that you're not expert on. And you'll find there is actually a neuroscience reason of why non-experts are better at disruptive solution. So I spent last 3 years actually spending time learning about human brain because I wanted to figure out how do we completely change the education system. So let me give you a little bit about why non-experts are better, and I'm going to come back with the education in 1 second. Our human brain, it turns out, is actually one of the best pattern matching device that has ever been created. In fact, the human brains are better pattern matching than any supercomputers, any software that has been created so far. We are able to see a small difference, a tiger hiding behind the bush. Behind the green bush, tiny dots, we can say, wow, that's a tiger right there. No supercomputer can do that. In fact, when we see a person in a large crowd, the human brain can say, I know that person. A computer has to now analyze everything unless they have an exact picture from the same angle. They can't actually find that person. And that is actually what happens. Once you become expert in your field, anytime you hear about the problem, what happens? You find an exact match. And when you find an exact match, you know the answer. And you say, well, I can modify it a little bit and give you that answer. When you're a non-expert, what happens is your brain does not find an exact match. It goes into the hierarchical. So the brain work in the hierarchical thing. And as you go in the hierarchy, it becomes more and more abstract. So when you're non-expert, you're thinking about the problem in abstract view, and you're trying to combine the things that have never been combined before. As I worked with Casey in the past at X Prize, and one of the very interesting things that came out of X Prize was we were looking at the oil cleanup. We all remember a couple of years ago when there was an oil spill in the Gulf. And British Petroleum spent $10 billion trying to clean up that oil. We were sitting at X Prize and we thought, why can't we come up with something better? Because BP is using exactly the same technology that Exxon Valdez used 10 years ago. Why can't we come up with an oil cleanup machine that's going to be at least twice as good than what they're using? Guess what we did? We launched a $1 million prize, not $1 billion prize, $1 million prize. And the thing was, it has to be at least twice as good what BP is using. And one of the team of finalists consisted of a guy from a tattoo parlor, a mechanic, and a dentist. It sounds like a start of a really bad joke. But that's actually what happened. So the story goes like that. The mechanic was getting a tattoo on his arm. And this tattoo parlor guy asked him, I say, you're a mechanic. Didn't you hear about that $1 million prize they're doing to build this machine that cleans up the oil? Can't you build something like that? And he said, I heard about that. But I was thinking about it. The oil spill happens when people do drilling. I got a dentist who does a lot of drilling. I should ask him. And that's how the dentist and a mechanic and a tattoo parlor guys came together. And guess what happened? They were thinking, they have no idea what to do. They were thinking the oil spill is on the surface. Maybe they need something like water ski. Well, what if they put a vacuum pump on it? What if they had a truck somewhere that collects the thing? But they were thinking about an abstract that has never been done. And the machine they built was twice as good than the existing machine that BP was using. Imagine that. That these three guys did something that a company that was spending $20 billion couldn't do because these guys could not, they were experts in their field. Right? So that's why you need the non-experts. Now, coming back and saying, that's great. But how do we solve the big problems? Look at what Tony's trying to do here. They're trying to completely reinvent the way the communities are created. He's thinking about how do we create a new model for healthcare? How do we create a new model for transportation? How do we create a new model for learning? How do we do that? So you think about it and saying, first of all, you have to say, why do you want to educate, period? Because once you start with the thing, not that education system, most of you know that it has become really fashionable to say our education system is broken. And everybody says that. What if I told you that our education system is not broken? In fact, people are wasting their time and energy trying to fix something that is not broken. In fact, our education system is obsolete. And when something is obsolete, you don't fix it, you replace it. Right? So, which is what we need to do. So why is it not broken? Because it's doing exactly what it was designed to do. It was designed for industrial era where you needed the plug and play people. That means you needed 5 people in the middle level management, whether they happen to be Paul or Todd or Terry, it didn't matter. They need to come in there, they need to be standardized, and they need to be plugged in. And that's how the education system was created for, to create these bureaucrats and to create these people who could be plug and play. In fact, our education system is designed just like a manufacturing process. How many of you know how the manufacturing process works? Many of you, good, right? So there's an assembly line. In the beginning of the assembly line, they normally have something called raw goods. And the raw goods are generally of the same size. And they go from station to station. On each station, you do a little bit of work. It moves to the next station. At the end of the assembly line, you go out and you have a QA person who would do a test to see, does this part pass or fail? And they have a QA testing or pass-fail. Now, think exactly how our education system works. We group our children by their date of manufacturing. You're 6-year-old, you go here. You're 7-year-old, you go here, right? And then you put them in a conveyor belt and say, first station, you teach them math. Next station, you teach them history. And you go to the end of the conveyor belt and you say, let's do the standardized testing, pass, fail, right? So that's exactly what it does. Now, beauty of the system is it does what it's designed to do, and it does that perfectly. So what's wrong with that system? Our needs have changed. Today, in our today's society, it doesn't matter what skill you have, that skill becomes obsolete in 5 to 10 years because technology is growing exponentially. And with that exponential growth in technology, everything that you learn has become obsolete. So how do you create education system for this new era where things are becoming obsolete faster? So you can't teach skills anymore. You have to now teach them how to learn. Learning to learn becomes more important, and learning to solve becomes more important. And it's no longer about a discipline and testing in a discipline. It's about how do we use interdisciplinary approach to solve a specific problem. So education system needs to be designed in a way that's collaborative, and interdisciplinary, and designed for people to think about how to apply the facts. And the reason is, every one of our child now has a smartphone. And when you have a smartphone, you have access to more information on your cell phone than the President Clinton had when he was a president. Imagine that. Today, your cell phone has more power, computing power, than the computer that landed the man on the moon. So with that, the teaching the facts are no longer important. So what do we do? In fact, our education system is designed to kill the creativity. Imagine that. And how does it create creativity? So they did actually a bunch of experiments. So when they went and asked a child when they were 5 years old and saying, how many different ways can you use a paperclip? And they could come up with 50 different ways a paperclip can be used. They put them through the education system. By the time they graduated from college, they can only come up with the 3 ways of doing it. You know why? Our education system teaches us that if there is a problem, there are four answers. And if you got 2 right answers, one of them is wrong. That means you have only one right answer to every problem. In the real world, we know there is more than one right answers. When we go out and discuss the problem, people have different ideas. And not all, in fact, there are more than one good ideas, and you can probably use more than one way of solving the same problem. And guess what also do? We also talk amongst each other and find a solution. In our education system, if you talk to your neighbor and you say, hey, what do you think is the right answer? What do you call? You call it cheater. You're cheating, right? In the real world, we say, you are really good. You're a team worker, right? Right? So how do we go out and create the education system now? Imagine. So people say, well, the Khan Academy is doing something along those lines. And in fact, this new term got created called MOOCs, which are called Massive Open Online Courses. That's going to change the world. Well, in some sense, it is better than what we have today because it provides access to all the information that you need. But it is still the first stage of the television. So I don't know how many of you remember or not, the first time when the televisions came out, people put the video camera in front of a radio jockey and called that a television, right? Now, television has come the long way since. It has become its own media. Now, we can't simply put a camera in front of a teacher and put that online and say, well, we got online education, right? Which is exactly what we're doing. The right education needs to be adaptive. That means it has to adapt to how you learn, not the child learning to adapt to how the teacher teaches. So that's one thing, that it has to be adaptive because people learn differently. Some people learn conceptually, some people learn experimentally, some people learn graphically. So everybody learns differently, and the education system has to be adaptive. Number two, it has to be personalized. Everybody learns at a different pace. Guess what happens? If you're learning at a different pace, why is it that we have to have a fixed time variable learning? That means you have 6 months in a semester and you learn what you can. If you learn a little bit, you get an A, and if you learn almost nothing, you get a D, right? And you move on to the next thing. What if we flip the thing to say, as opposed to fixed time variable learning, it is fixed learning variable time. That means you have to learn an equivalent of an A, whether it takes you 3 hours, 3 days, 3 months, or 3 years. It's like a video game. You can't go to a level 2 unless you pass level 1, whether it takes you 1 hour, 1 day, or 1 month, or never, right? You can't go to the next level unless you pass the level 1. And that's how the education system needs to be. It also needs to be not only effective, it also has to be addictive. Why is it that you never have to tell a child, can you please go play a video game for a while? Right? Wouldn't that be nice someday if my 7-year-old came to me and said, Dad, can I just do physics for 1 more hour, please? Right? Can I do a math for another hour, please? Why? There's no reason when these children can solve some of the most complex problems in a video game, why they have to struggle in a basic class. So now, so we can completely reinvent education system if we do it from scratch. Think about not fixing it, but replacing it. And I can come back and tell you a little bit about how would you do that. It cannot be that you can fix the education system in a current public education system. It has to come from non-consumption. You have to start something, say maybe from homeschooling, and then you go to the private school, then you go to charter school, and you create enough of the push and pull so that public education system will have no choice but to implement it. Or you go to the public education system and provide the complementary services. For example, build the education system that teaches Chinese, because public education system doesn't teach Chinese. So that becomes a way for you to get into the public education system without competing for it. They are running out of funds. So you can teach them anything other than STEM and they will take it, right? And once you get the Trojan horse there and the kid says, I love the way they teach, why can't I learn Spanish here? Why can't I learn the math here? Why can't I learn the physics here? And then suddenly you have the whole system that changes upside down. Right? So there is a neuroscience way of changing the education system. Now you ask me, well, that's great. What would you do with the healthcare? Well, healthcare is a big problem. The problem with the healthcare is we have really experts who spend 10 years of their life learning about medical technology, and they become the doctor. So there are a couple of problems. The guy who is the top of their class, you know what they call them? A doctor. And the guy who's at the bottom of the class, you know what they call them? A doctor. Right? Right. So secondly, these doctors are really good at when there is a complex problem. For basic things, most of the time when we go to see a primary care physician, we're going for a routine stuff. A flu, the cold, the malaria, the kind of common things, right? You don't need a doctor for that. In fact, the primary care physician, 40% of the time when you go to a primary care physician, they misdiagnose you. In fact, the human beings are really not very good at that stuff. You know why? They drink, they get drunk, they fight with their spouses, right? They get mad at people when they don't like what they hear. Right? The point is, human beings is not very good at it. What if you are able to develop the microfluidic sensors? You are able to develop the sensors and the tablet devices. These tablet devices are now $25. You can plug in the sensors, and these sensors can diagnose most common diseases better than the board-certified physician. What if you are able to use these devices by a nurse or even a high school student who can use these devices to essentially diagnose the most common diseases in a triage? And that reduces the cost of healthcare. So imagine if your HMO came to you and says, sir, I can't force you to do what you don't want to do, but we have two insurance plans for you. One is the insurance plan. We have the sensors and the software that has been proven to be better than a board-certified physician. If that becomes your primary contact, if the nurse needs help, she will call the doctor. And she is your primary contact. Your insurance is $100 a month. Or you can see a doctor, your insurance is $2,000 a month. You can pick whatever you want. I would say most people will probably say, you know what, I will take the $100. And guess what? It is better. So it reduces the health care, and the doctor now gets freed up to do what they do best when there is something more complex than a flu. So the point is, if you're able to start to use the technology. So you ask me, is it really possible to do that? I can tell you that what individuals are doing today, the companies used to do, and what companies are doing today that the countries used to do, right? So there's a 16-year-old kid working with my 16-year-old son today, a guy named Jack and Raka. I don't know if many of you heard of or not. That kid, 16-year-old kid, developed a microfluidic paper, 5-cent paper with a $50 machine to be able to diagnose the ovarian cancer and a lung cancer with a 5-cent piece of paper. And you know how he learned? Google it. He learned everything he needed to learn about how to diagnose cancer from Google. So all the information that's available today, he had access to it just like you did. But what did he do? He went out and used it because he was motivated. His uncle was diagnosed with a cancer, and he didn't want that to happen to anybody else. So that motivated kid went out and found a diagnosis for a cancer with a 5-cent piece of paper. Right? So that is possible. So we need to start thinking about, like, say, for energy. What do we do? People talk about solar energy. People talk about all kinds of things, right? The fact is, it's never going to be either or. We need to think creatively. What if we are able to create a synthetic bacteria that's able to use the carbon dioxide from air, use the salt water to convert and excrete the fossil fuel? Imagine if that happens. We can start to take a ocean water in a pool and convert that into a fossil fuel. And it's going to suck the carbon dioxide out of the air. So it reduces the pollution, uses the salt water and the sun to create the fossil fuel if that's what we need. What if you are able to make the solar cells better by using the synthetic bacteria photosynthesis of the solar cell along with the synthetic bacteria to improve the yield on the solar cells? What I'm trying to say is there is no problem that's large enough that can't be solved with innovation and entrepreneurship. It is all about in our imagination. If you can imagine it, you can solve it. If you can dream it, you can do it. So I'm going to step back for 5 minutes here, just give you a little bit of my background. I grew up in India. We actually had no food to eat. We grew up very, very poor. We actually didn't have to be poor. My father actually worked as an overseer, as a civil engineer, whose job was to build for the government the buildings. India was a corrupt system, and government realized that everybody is going to take a bribe, so why pay them? So they say, if you need to make $100, we'll pay you 10, and you can take 90 in bribe. My dad, in his humble wisdom, decided that he wants to be an honest man. And that caused the problem for us because we had no money. We could not eat food for weeks at a time. But that was actually not the big problem because human body is designed not to eat too much. In fact, it was designed not to eat very often because when you eat too much, we know what happens, right? We store it, right? So we need to fix that too. That we can't, we need to be able to rewrite the software of our body. So that's another thing you should remember. When was the last time you have electronics in your hand whose software was not updated for last 10 years? We have this body, which is a hardware. Its software has not been written for millions of years. We need to rewrite the software, let the body know, don't store the fat. I have a Safeway and a Whole Food right next to mine. I will have a food today, and I'll have food tomorrow, and I'm going to have a big meal tonight, I'm going to have a big meal tomorrow night. Don't store it. And I'm going to drink today, and I'm going to drink tomorrow. So we should be able to rewrite the software of our body so we don't have to live in obesity anymore. Right. So coming back to it, the biggest problem that we found was not the food. In the system, my father was supposed to take the bribe, and he takes a little bit of the money from the pot and passes on to his boss. And his boss will take something from the pot, pass it on to his boss. Every 6 months or so, his boss will wonder why the money is not coming in and will call the contractor. Hey, John, what's happening with the money? And he says, I can't give the money. Can you believe that idiot is asking me to build a house to this spec? He's saying, use the damn cement, don't use the sand. If I'm going to use the cement, how am I going to pay you the money? I'm supposed to use sand so the damn building will fall in 3 years and you'll call me to rebuild it. And this guy doesn't want me to use that. Guess what happens in government? You never get fired, you get transferred. So my dad, every 6 months, that son of a bitch needs to go. And that son of a bitch went to the next village. So every 6 months, we moved from village to village to village. And most of my education was done sitting in the places where there were no tables, no chairs. We sat on the floor, we wrote on the floor, and we learned. With that, my sister went on to become a postdoctorate in applied mathematics. My brother had a PhD in computer science and statistics. And I'm the least educated person with engineering and MBA. So when anybody tells you that when people are in the low socioeconomic, they get poor education, let me tell you something. That there is a correlation between poverty and education, but poverty is not the cause of lack of education. In the families where they value education, you get education. In the families don't value education, they don't get education. Poverty has nothing to do with it. Right? So people are... And I think a lot of us, when we look at the problems, we actually look at the problems because we find correlation, and we confuse the correlation with the causation. So I just want to give you one more example, then I'm going to step back. So I came, by the way, came to this country about 30 years ago with $5 in my pocket, didn't speak the language. And God has been amazingly kind to us. So I have dedicated my life to figuring out what will I do to give back to the society. The people who helped me become who I am today, they don't need my help, and I don't even know who these people are. And I have decided I'm going to go out and do pay forward. I'm going to help every young entrepreneur, everybody that I meet, anything that I can do to help somebody. That's my way of paying back to the society that has given me so much. So in some sense, we all have to think about success in that way. So when people ask, what is a success? Success is not about how much money do you have in the bank. Success is simply about how many lives have you touched in a positive way that you will be remembered by. And that is the definition of success I have instilled in our children. And that's the definition of success we should all use. And the only other things I can tell you that from my own personal experience is, our children ask me, how do you know when you actually have become successful? And I thought about it, and I found a perfect way of knowing when somebody actually been successful. The day you become humble is the day you have become successful. Because if you still have an iota of arrogance left in you, you're still trying to prove something to somebody or yourself, you're not successful. And in my definition, Donald Trump is not. But so stop proving anything to anybody when you become humble. I mean, you look at Tony. Tony doesn't need to prove anybody to somebody that he's successful. He goes out here and sits here with everybody just like everybody. And that, to me, is a true definition of somebody who has been successful. Thank you, Tony. So let me give you a little bit more about Moon Express. How did I get into the Moon Express? And to me, I was growing up as a child, I was saying, looking at the moon, and I always felt that when there was nothing else in life, you look up in the moon, and we have this fascination for the moon, and you always wonder, there is somebody out there looking out for you. So I always had that fascination for moon. And one day when the opportunity arose, I thought, what if you could go to the moon? The moon has so much resources. People say, why do you want to go to the moon and mine for the resources? Moon has trillions and trillions of dollars of platinum grade material. If you think about it, all the things we are mining on Earth, we are actually mining asteroids. These are the asteroids that actually hit Earth in the early days of Earth. In fact, there's a website, if you guys go check out, called AsterRank, A-S-T-E-R, rank, R-A-N-K.com. It'll tell you that each of the asteroids they find are worth somewhere between 5 trillion to over 100 trillion. One asteroid. Imagine these asteroids have been hitting for billions of years on moon. All of these asteroids are being crushed for you, ready to be picked up. The beauty of the moon versus Earth was, Earth has something called atmosphere, which is really great for us, but it really sucks for asteroids, right? Right? You saw in the last month when the asteroid came in Russia, right? The Chelyabinsk. A massive asteroid came, and by the time it went through the atmosphere, burnt and crashed and burned, and tiny pieces were found. That really sucks for the poor asteroid, but it really saved us. On the moon, there is no atmosphere, none whatsoever. There is no wind, nothing. Remember the footprint on the moon? Yeah. They're still there. There is no wind, there is no atmosphere, nothing. Anything you leave there just stays right there. In addition to that, on Earth, we have this molten lava in the center of the Earth. It's a tectonic activities. It keeps pulling everything down. Moon is solid. There is no tectonic activities. That means everything is sitting right on the surface. And you know what? Beauty of the thing is, it's broken down for you. It comes and crashes, and it just shatters. Right? So now you're able to go pick up all of these platinum-grade materials. Rare earth elements. 97% of all rare earth elements that we use in all electronics, by the way, all come from China, and China has refused to export them. Imagine that. We have monopoly that China said that only rare earth elements can only be used for electronics when they're manufactured in China. What if we are able to get all these rare earth elements from moon? And people ask me, can you really find them on Earth? I say, you know why they call them rare earth elements, not the rare moon elements? Right? So, one of the questions I got to say, what made you decide you want to mine the moon? And I said, well, God offered me two choices. Do you want to moon the mine or mine the moon? I said, I would do mine the moon. I don't think mooning the mine would be quite as fun for me. So that's how I ended up going into mining the moon. I really think not only it's a fun thing to do, it is a great business. It's an awesome business. And imagine a child who did not have a food to eat. If he can go dream and go to the moon and land on the moon as the first private company, not a country, there are only 2 countries that have ever landed on the moon. A first private company ever to land on the moon, if a boy coming from India with no food to eat can do that, there is nothing in this world that you guys can't do. Thank you. All right. So with that, I'm going to, if you still have time, open it up for anything you want to ask me about any subject.
I've got the mic here, so we'll do questions. Who's got the first question? Oh, there's going to be a lot, I think. Here we go. In the front, and then we'll go in the back here.
Hey, Naveen, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
It's good to see you again. I would love for you, because you first started talking about the difference between being an inventor and an innovator.
Yeah.
I would love to know your perspective, because you actually are considered a tangible inventor. You have about, I think, 3 patents with Microsoft. If you could just talk about your experience with that, and what does it feel like to actually have patents, and how does it translate to you? Thank you.
It makes you feel good, but it does nothing for you, right? Right. The patents are really not the way to really for the invention. They actually are. It's simply to file a lawsuit against somebody who you think might collect some money from, right? But to me, that idea of invention came from venture capitalists, where they say, we only fund these breakthrough innovations. I can tell you that to be a successful entrepreneur, it's all about flawless execution, not about breakthrough innovation. You look at most successful companies, very few of them invent anything. They are better executioner than most other people. Apple did not invent, right? Microsoft does not invent. Facebook did not invent. Before that was a Facebook, before MySpace, before MySpace was Friendster, before Friendster used to be personal home pages. These things are simply the evolution, and it's just a better execution, not the invention. So if you want to be a great entrepreneur, just remember, just like a real estate, it's not location, location, location. In the entrepreneurship, it's all about execution, execution, execution. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question regarding what you said about innovators need to be outside. They can't be experts.
Yeah.
So when someone goes into a field and they have a great idea, and then they go to the experts, and the experts are like, nope, can't do it. What can the innovator do? I mean, besides market validation and faith?
Yeah. So I think that's actually what I said. The experts are very good at telling you why it won't work. Why they have tried it, it just has no potential. So one thing I realize is, if you're trying to do something and if nobody calls you crazy, you're not dreaming big enough, right? Right. So unless somebody say, when I tell them I'm mining the moon, you say, you're goddamn crazy. And I say, well, I'm on to something big, right? Some people are just crazy, right? But other than some people are just being crazy, I think your idea has to be so innovative, so disruptive, and people say, that is damn crazy. right? And then you know you're onto something. So idea is experts will always tell you, if you go ask an educator, they'll tell you there's nothing broken about it. It works just as well. The only problem is we just need more salary for the teachers. We need more computers for the things. We need better air conditioning for the thing. They all are talking about the things that make the things, what I would say, removes the dissatisfaction. So one of the other things that I learned about life is the things that people complain about, if you remove them, it doesn't make the people happy. It just stops them from being unhappy. What makes people happy is very different things than just simply removing their things that cause them unhappiness. So if you remove the unhappiness, the things they complain about, they are no longer unhappy, but they're not happy. To make them happy, you have to come up with something totally different about what motivates them, right? So in terms of, to answer your specific question, don't let expert tell you, you go out and build a small prototype and test it in the marketplace and prove them wrong. And the more times the experts are proven wrong, more times the entrepreneurs are validated. So good luck.
All right. Question in the front here. Let me bring the mic around here.
So you didn't talk very much about Singularity University. One of the questions that I think would be interesting is, in 25 years from now, what's coming to influence society, or what's going to be here that none of us see coming?
Very good. So as you know, I'm on the board of Singularity University, and we look at all of the exponential technology. And I think I'm going to answer slightly differently. What are the massive, massive industries that you'll call $100 billion industry? So number one thing is, how many of you want to create a $1 billion company? Raise your hands. What if I told you it's really, really trivial to create a $1 billion company? You know how you do that? You solve a $10 billion problem, right? So if you can go out and solve a $10 billion problem, you got a $1 billion company in your hand. So now coming back and asking me, what are those 10 billion, $100 billion problems, and what industries they're going to come from? Education, I mentioned. Education is $100 billion, if not $1 trillion problem. It is something well within our reach to be able to disrupt it. And it's going to be disrupted by somebody in this room or somebody out there who's going to say, you know what, this thing is not broken. I'm going to completely come up with a totally different way of educating. And that's going to be disrupted. And it's not going to be the MOOCs. It's going to be a whole bunch of ways you're able to get the neural feedback to know when actually the child is actually learning and processing the information rather than simply storing and retrieving the information. And you're able to now actually look at the brain inside to know when the child has zoned out, when the child is actually processing the information, analyzing the information, or simply retrieving it. So education is one big industry. The second big industry is going to be created in the genetics and the regenerative medicine. I can tell you that there's going to be a fundamental shift here. Most of the companies who are in the pharmaceutical industry, so if you are a CEO of Pfizer, you think your biggest competitor is Merck or other pharmaceutical companies. And if you're really a forward-looking CEO, you might think your competition might be coming from biotechs. Imagine if you're able to sequence not only just the genome, but the proteome, the microbiome, or epigenome, suddenly you're able to make this a big data problem. It simply becomes a big data problem, not the pharmaceutical problems. And your competitor is going to be the Googles of the world, not the pharmaceutical companies. So you have to imagine that. Your competition is always hiding in your plain sight. You think your competitions are other people who are doing the same thing, whereas you get disrupted and you say, where did that come from? Well, it came from when you're not paying attention. Because while you're reading the same industry rags, going to the same conferences in the industry, you are not learning anything. So the whole healthcare system is going to change once we are able to understand. I think you probably know that our human body only contains 10% of our own DNA. 10 times more, the 90% of the DNA in our body is a foreign, which are bacteria. So the bacteria in our body consist 90% of the DNA in our body. The microbiomes that are in your gut, they are basically forming, they're parasites, but they are good parasites. And those are the parasites that actually keeps our body running. So 90% of our body is a foreign parasite. So the whole concept from a spiritual perspective, what is me, who am I, really changes. Me is not my body, me is not my DNA, because 90% of my body is not me, right? Right. So it's really, so in some sense, you have to think about what do you do. The third big industry is going to be created in the space. You can already see that happen. The SpaceX, the Elon Musk has changed the way things are done. Imagine a private company launching the rocket. at a cost that was unimaginable. For $40 million, you are able to go to the orbit. Imagine that. That was never possible. Imagine if you can now, he believes within the next 10 years, he'll be able to build a rocket to go to the Mars at the cost of under $100,000 to $200,000. If that is possible, that changes the game. It is a singularity event. If a private company ever lands on the moon and able to do the things on the moon, it's a singularity event. It changes how you think. So people say, what would you do? It's like my asking, when the iPhones first came out, people say it is a platform. And if you went and asked somebody, what would you do on this iPhone? I seriously doubt anybody would have said, I want to throw the birds at the pigs. But that's exactly what they did. Right? That's exactly what they did. Right? So you have no idea what people are going to do when you give them something to do.
And with that, all right, who's got a next question here? That was a good one. All right, here you go.
What's your approximate time frame to the moon?
So we are looking to launch a robotic lander in 2015. And at a cost which is fractional of the cost. And the reason it's fractional of the cost is not because we are really smart people. It's just that the technology has come a long way. NASA would tell you it will cost you $1 billion to go to the moon. And the reason it costs us less is, firstly, we don't have to worry about becoming 99.9999. It is the last 2 nines or the last 4 nines that actually cost 90% of the cost. We insure the damn thing. We say, you know what, if it blows up, let it blow up. It's insured. Right? So you go with a 99%. Right? You go with 99% at the 1/10 of the cost and insure it. Better than the NASA's problem is simple. If it blows up, their funding dries up. So they rather spend $1 billion than fail. And to me, the failure is not something that you should ever be afraid of. If you are afraid to fail, that means you are afraid to innovate. In fact, the failure, what people define, is simply iteration. The only time you fail in life is when you give up. If you don't give up, you never failed. You only learned. You simply change. You iterate and reiterate. You say, well, that problem didn't work this way. Let me try that way. It's not a failure. It simply is stepping stone to a bigger success. So in life, when you go out to ask for an advice from somebody, if you ask somebody who has only succeeded and succeeded and succeeded, he's probably the wrong guy to get advice from. Ask some advice from somebody, the guy who has failed and failed and failed and succeeded and succeeded and succeeded. Somebody who has learned to fail. And the reason is, if you're not failing, you're taking the safe shots. Right? In a baseball, right? The best baseball player, the stats are .33. 2 out of 3 times you're going, best baseball player is going to swing the bat and miss the ball. Imagine that, right? Or in a basketball, actually, is much better. You think about it, I watched Kobe Bryant for the last 8-10 years. There are nights he has 100% of the shots in. And those are the nights he gets under 10 points. And the nights he gets 50 points, he misses 50% of the shots. Right? So if you're making 100% of the shots, you're making very safe shots. If you want to make 10 points, get 100% of the in. If you want to make 50 points, you're going to miss half of them. And that's how you succeed in life. So if you want to be a billionaire, fail 50% of the time. Anybody else?
Hi, Naveen.
Yes.
Here. Over here. Oh, here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
I can see you, but I can hear you.
Okay, you want me to stand up? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for the talk. It's extremely inspiring. Your story, the journey, it's extremely inspiring. So thank you for that. And I loved what you said about poverty and education, how it's correlated and it's not the causation. So your children, how are you teaching them differently? How are you making their education experience different?
I'm glad you asked. As I said, we have 3 children, and one is 23-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 16-year-old. Our 23-year-old started at a young age, when he was 16-year-old, something called Kairos Society, and learned to give back as a nonprofit, which is the world's largest college entrepreneurial society. So if you go look at Kairos Society, when he was 16 years old, he wanted to give every young child the same experience he had growing up in an affluent family, a mentorship to all the students around the world. Every year he hosts an event at New York Stock Exchange where he brings 350 top entrepreneurs from every part of the world and 150 top CEOs. And from Richard Branson to Bill Clinton to Bill Gates, everybody comes there and there are no speeches. You sit there and you help these young entrepreneurs. Our daughter, who is 19 years old now, as a freshman at Stanford, she is doing neuroscience, and she started when she was 16 years old, something called I Care, We Care, to help the young kids solve their own problems. She became the youth champion leader for United Nations. She is selected by the Gates Foundation as the Young Philanthropist of the Year. And for the first time in the history of Stanford, they selected her to represent the women at Stanford, business at Stanford, women business at Stanford, as a freshman. And that woman, now, and the reason, so you ask me what happened here, and a child, by the way, who's 16-year-old, is working with Jack and Raka to solve find the diagnosis for competing for tricorder prize for $10 million. So what happened is in the early days, and I think the kids thing, we decided we're going to teach our children the same thing that I told you, that success is not about how much money you have. We could have, me and my wife talked about it a lot, and she said, maybe we should tell them that we don't have much money so they have motivation to go work. And I said, the problem is, one day they're going to learn to read, and that's going to be a problem. So why not we tell them that we have more money than they will ever need in their lifetime or their kids' lifetime. However, their self-worth is not what they have. Its self-worth comes from what they create. Their self-worth is not how much money they have. Self-worth is gone from how many lives have they been able to improve. And time again, we went and talked about that. And that's the reason that our oldest went on to start a nonprofit that became the world's largest entrepreneur society. Our daughter is working on girls' education. If you get a chance, her name is Priyanka Jain. Watch her TED Talk on girls' education, and you'll be moved. So Priyanka is Priyanka. And just amazing 19-year-old girl with a passion for girls' education. Right? So the point is, when you give the values to the children, what actually matters in life. So what I realized was, even though our children, you tell them something, they'll give you every single indication they're not hearing you. They will, whatever, right? But every single word you tell them, if you let them know what makes you proud of them, I can guarantee you they will come through and do that. Just to give you just simple anecdotal story, I think might make sense. My oldest son, when he was 10 years old, and that's 1990. I was at the peak of running InfoSpace. The company was worth $40 billion. And who knows, my net worth was, who goes? I mean, multi-gazillion dollars, who cares, right? He came to me when he was 10 years old and said, you know what, Dad, I'm going to make more money than you ever did. I could have simply put my arm around him and said, good luck, son. I didn't. That I thought was a teachable moment. I sat him down. I said, you know what, Uncle? Success is not about money. I will be so proud of you if someday you are able to touch more people's lives than I was able to do. And that will make me really proud of you. You know what he said to me? He said, whatever, Dad. Guess what happened? He went on. 16-year-old, he calls me as a freshman from Wharton. And he said, Dad, I have this idea. I've been thinking and going on to, I went to MIT. I talked to these kids, brilliant entrepreneurs. They come from middle-class family. They never had the same experience that you gave me, that I went to board meetings. You introduced me to everybody. These kids don't have the same mentors. What if I started the society that allows each one of these kids to have the same mentorship that I did? And that's how I'm going to improve a million people's life. How about that? And I said, I'm so proud of you, son. Right. So that is, to me, is really the things. The only other, many of you are parents, and the reason I'm going to talk to you as a father is because I really think sometimes the experience of a father, might hopefully touch one of you. We had a very similar story with our daughter. My daughter, when she was 16-year-old, came to me and said, Dad, I know you love science and technology. I want nothing to do with science and technology, so just get used to it. Right. I'm just not used to having a teenager talk to me like that. So I say to her, I still call her my doll. I said, doll, you're not letting Dad do his job. She looks at me puzzled and she says, what's Dad's job? I said, Dad's job is really simple. Not letting you make up your mind until I have exposed you to as many things as I think you should be exposed to. She said, what is it that you would like me to do then? And I said, I would like you to go to Singularity University. And I want you to learn about nanotechnology, the neuroscience, the genetics, the artificial intelligence. And she rolls her eyes and she said, Dad, did you just not hear what I said? I have no interest in science and technology. I said, Doll, I heard you loud and clear. Here's what we should do. If you give me one promise, I will give you the promise back. If you promise me you're going to go there for 4 weeks with an open mind, wanting to learn and wanting to like. And if you come back after 4 weeks, you tell me what you want to do in your life, and I promise you I'll support it. And she said, Dad, if you make that promise, I will go. She did go. Came back after 4 weeks, opens the door, and the first words out of her mouth were, Dad, I've made up my mind now. And my first words were, oh, shit. She walks up the door and she said, Dad, I've decided I'm going to be either a neuroscientist or genetist. I took a deep breath and I said, Doll, at the risk of you changing your mind, can you tell me what actually happened here? She said, Dad, it's really simple. I am in high school. I go do these science things. I mix these things. Something blows up, something changes color. I do these things. It doesn't matter how it impacts. When I went to Singularity University, I saw how neuroscience can change education, how genetics can go out and impact billions of people's lives who have no access to healthcare. I want to make an impact in the world, and now I know how to use the science and technology to do that. Now, imagine if I had done what most parents would do when their favorite girl comes to them and say, I have a passion, our first inclination to say, whatever it is, I want to support it. That is same as saying, I don't give a shit, do what you want. Right? Seriously, you have to expose them to enough things before they can decide what their passion is. Otherwise, if I had done the same thing, she wouldn't have found her true passion, and the world would have lost out on a great scientist. Right? Yes?
Oh, actually, I have to say that I'm a education expatriate. I didn't go to very much public school, but university. So the question I ask you is, you keep talking about education.
Yeah.
I don't look at it as a failed process, but it has nothing or very little to do with learning. You keep talking about learning, which is a process of absorption and understanding,
yes,
which people seek on their own. Children are passionate for it. Isn't education's primary role to stop learning?
Okay, so I think, first of all, I think we agree on the fact is that the education system does not deliver what it is supposed to do, but it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which was to teach the facts and the skills. And the skills is what was needed in the industrial era. It is completely irrelevant and obsolete for today's world. And you are absolutely right. We have to now educate from the perspective of solving those problems. So what if you learn all the skills and the facts you need at home, and when you come to school, you're simply sitting in a group trying to solve the problem from the facts that you have already learned at home. So your homework is learning the facts, and you come to the class to solve the problem. And that actually becomes a new model of how you do that, whether you do that virtually or you do that physically. And the teacher becomes the life coach, and teacher becomes a facilitator rather than simply a tape machine that you press the button and they go through the lecture on their own. Right. So I think you're absolutely right in that way.
All right.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we've got...
There's one more guy.
One more question. Okay, that's the final question. This is going to be it. We got to wrap it up.
Basically, we've been talking a lot about education for the children and growing the next generation and all that stuff.
Yep.
One of the questions I have is, how do we deal with the situation where we've got a whole population of people who've already been through the educational system? How do we transform what's happening with them? Okay.
So I think, in some sense, how do you change the engine in the plane that's already up in the air, right? So, so there is really no good answer to it, except that we have to be able to take the people who have already gone through the education system, and you have to unlearn many of the things that you learned. So it's no different than when I hire somebody MBA, especially from Harvard. I spent 2 years trying to teach them to unlearn everything they learned before they actually can become an entrepreneur, because the MBA guys are probably the worst entrepreneurs you'll ever find, right? Because they always go through the SWOT analysis, and they will always go through all these spreadsheets. And I tell them, in the real life, The spreadsheet doesn't tell you anything that you already don't know, because there are so many different variables and there are so many assumptions you make. If you, in your gut, you already know what's going to work, you make very positive assumptions. If you know it's not going to work, you make negative assumptions, right? Guess what happens? The spreadsheet spits out what your assumptions are. So a spreadsheet does absolutely nothing on what your gut is already telling you. So I think as an entrepreneur, learning to listen to your own gut, telling you what is it that you feel, and if you can't feel it, don't do it. Yeah. Thank you.